to talk about a particular book called Women Don't Owe You Pretty by Florence Given. I want to preface this by saying I feel there are books that you find, both fiction, nonfiction, anthologies, short stories, like there are stories and words that you find in your life that you have to find at the right time. And sometimes those stories find you, and sometimes you seek out those stories. But there's also a reversal, and sometimes you find books that, had you found them earlier, would have been super impactful, but now you're not so sure. So, had I found this book at about 12, had it been released when I was about 12, I think it could have been super impactful. I think this book could be a great entry point to feminism if presented with other material. Because I find overall, the book talks about a lot of topics and kind of tries to tie it back into what is pretty privilege, and ties pretty privilege to white privilege and classism and class privilege and gender privilege, like if you're cisgendered and things like that. And sometimes those connections aren't fully formed. Like, knowing what I know about feminism and different social issues, I can link those back on my own, but without that, it leaves something to be discussed and to be asked, which I think is why this can be a good intro to feminism for like 12, 13-year-olds, right? I think this could, like, there's life lessons and things about relationships that are important that are discussed. With that said, I have a glaring issue with the section titled Dump Him. And I'm actually going to start with the end of the section, and then work our way through. The end of the section ends with, "Got it?" ? I listened to this on audio. And sometimes when I'm listening to a nonfiction book on audio, I'm like, particularly like Effed at Birth, I just finished. And for like the majority of the book, I think it was the narrator not clicking with me. And then once I finally got past that, I was able to enjoy it. But this book was read by the author. It was read by Florence Given. Now, every person's experience with the things discussed in this book and with feminism overall are wildly different based on like intersectionality and stuff, and like what other life experiences you have. The Dump Him section was wildly neglectful of support systems. Personally, I stayed in a relationship that I shouldn't have stayed in because the people surrounding that relationship were my only support system, whether they be good or bad. And it didn't take into account the impossibility of situations where you have one bad situation and another bad situation, and getting out of one results in going to the other. And I have an issue with the author not acknowledging that there are times where you can't just dump him. The overall message of find someone who's going to treat you right, I highly agree with. And I highly agree with, like, don't stay with someone who has continual problems, and definitely don't stay in a toxic and abusive relationship. I don't want to say that the section was victim blaming, because I don't think it was. It felt intentionally neglectful of acknowledging a broader range of life. And I don't understand. I think what made this stick out, if this was not a book that tried to accomplish everything and talk about everything, I don't think I would have picked up on this particular issue. And when we are talking about feminism, and when we are talking about women's rights and reproductive rights of people with wombs and that sort of thing, and non-binary rights, we need to discuss all access points. We need to meet people where they are. We need to find people where they are, both those that need help and those who need to get on board. So the book exploring that is not an issue. It's frankly mandatory in any point of feminism right now, as it should be. Now, I don't think that was done well, but we'll get to that later. But by doing this and then ignoring, the possibility of multiple toxic, we'll use the word toxic, relationships, both romantic and non-romantic, going on at once, that prevents particularly women, because that's what she used in the book, from leaving, is very it didn't match. It fell into heteronormativity and classism, and it fell into the hole it was trying to pave over. And then it ended with "got it?" ? And the author, I was listening to her read it, it seemed preachy. It seemed like you as a reader were being talked down to from this person who is higher than. And then in the next section she talks about we shouldn't put people on pedestals because they'll inevitably disappoint. We shouldn't put people higher than ourselves for X, Y, and Z reasons, yet she's talking down to the reader. And I don't think that was intentional, but that's how it glaringly sounded. Then in a follow-up section, she says, you're never going to be fully healed, and then goes through a whole long list of what not to do until you're fully healed. And I was iffy about this book until I got to the dump him section. And I was like, maybe, I was on the brand of maybe this just isn't for me. I am at a different point in my feminism. I'm at a different point in my life journey. But had I read this book when I was 12, 13, had I read it even when I was 15 and took the relationship part of things before I got into that relationship that is making the dump him section really irritating, I think it could have been much more impactful. And I think if this is someone's introduction to feminism, as I said, up until you get to the dump him part, I think you're doing great. I think that this is a very basic, I wouldn't say well explained, but it almost, I don't know if it intentionally leaves you with more questions to go explore different things. I felt like nothing was really explored fully, but I feel like if you present this, as I said, with different resources and material to 12 and 13-year-olds, I feel like it's an okay jumping off point. Do I think other books are better and other material are better for that? Yes, absolutely. Do I think sometimes you have to start in an academic sense? Yes, that might just be my background. I'm currently in university, and it might be that I don't love doing a lot of self-help books, and that's almost what this came across at some point. And there's also a section when talking about makeup and stuff, and it wasn't really discussed as being reclaimed as a part of self-expression, and was heavily denoted, heavily talked down upon about being part of the male gaze and stuff, and the author talks about the fact that when you're starting your feminist journey, you should not be high and mighty about it. You should not things that you just stopped doing, you should not call out other people for doing, or if you do it, don't do it in an aggressive manner. Say, okay, that wasn't really cool, this is what I just learned, if you want to learn that with me, that's awesome, type thing, which I think is really needed. But as I said, I'm much later in my feminist journey, and I've read and listened more broadly and more specifically about specific issues. Not my favorite, but what I learned the most from probably would have been the Pain Gap that I just listened to on audio in January. And that probably talking about how women, and most notably women of color, have such high mortality rates in the US, even though they're a developed nation. and exploring that issue and going through that way, and how we don't believe women and women with chronic pain. And as a woman with chronic pain, that really resonated with me, and that was something I found when I needed it on my feminist and chronic pain and journey in life. And like, as I said, this one I feel like I would have probably been all over it as a 13-year-old, and I could have used it as a way to learn more, which I'm not, like, I feel like this might be a good book for an introduction up until you get to the dumb pimp part. After that, don't finish the book. But I feel like, I shouldn't say that, but particularly sections from this book could be good jumping off points for someone starting their feminist journey. But the dumb pimp section, the section about how you're not going to be fully healed and then don't do X, Y, and Z until you're fully healed, really peeved me off. And before that, I was like, maybe this just isn't a book for me. Maybe I'm not the target audience. And then they start talking about toxic relationships. I'm like, okay. And they start talking about like things that had happened to me and stuff. I'm like, all right, I feel like I'm your target audience, and let me tell you, this is not landing well. I don't know, it really left a bad taste in my mouth, especially how she ended it. And I know like the got it ? Was supposed to be like relatable and like lighthearted and stuff. I think that was what she was going for, because there's some other, like, she'll say something that's not academic. This is not an academic book, but she'll say something that is like serious and like on point, like on the point in subject matter, and then she'll like take it out and put it in like, I don't want to like Instagram-y. And that's a comment that's been said in some of the other reviews I read. And yeah, something about this book just left a very bad taste in my mouth after the dumb pimp section. And I mean, it could just be because my experience, I don't know if my experience was particular, but talking to other people who have similar experiences and have been in toxic relationships, especially when they are young and do not have a lot of independence, or at any point, if they are poor, if they have less access to economic mobility, like there are impounding factors as to why people stay in these types of relationships. And I feel the way that she explained it villainized those people. I don't think it was intentional, but I think if I'm able to read it like that, other people are as well. So that's my main issue with this book. As I said, I feel like sections of this book could be good for an introduction to feminism for like 12 and 13-year-olds when presented with other material. And had I found this book when I was 12 or 13, I probably would have eaten it up, right? I probably basically, actually, like, as I said, if I found this book before that particular relationship that really ruined that last part of the book, like, ruined a few years for me too, but, like, particularly made me not be able to, like, frankly, I was listening to it on my walk and I was getting mad, like, the way that the author was describing these things and saying these things, because I felt like it was so neglectful of, you know, acknowledging that there are other situations where a woman or a person cannot leave a toxic relationship, or can and seems to have the resources to, but there are other factors. And I felt, it just left a really bad taste in my mouth. And I felt like also another thing is that it made comments surrounding capitalism and how the male gaze and like the patriarchy really sets into place capitalism as well, because, you know, most systems and all systems of oppression are rooted in capitalism, and capitalism is rooted in systems of oppression. But then the author didn't actually say why, she's from the UK, and it almost seemed very Americanized in the way that you might say a comment about capitalism, but you wouldn't dare question it, right? Like, it seemed very Democrat. Like, that's the only way that I can explain it. You're like, these things are bad, but capitalism is fine, until the end where there was a glossary and she talked about how capitalism was oppressive and exploitative. But if you don't do that to the end, and like I wanted to make this video, so I didn't drop off at the dump him part, but if people drop off, they're not getting the full picture. I mean, there was a lot of things excuse me, like that weren't actually explored until the glossary. And if people have dropped off, they weren't going to get the full picture. You know, like even of the sections they read. So I think I'm going to give this a 2-star. Just because I think sections of it are good. I think, like, good as an introduction. I want to be like, look, this is feminism. Like, I would be like, hey, here's ideas surrounding, you know, feminism, and you should take these and use them to explore other broad topics books, and then more specific topic books. Like, currently I'm listening to White Feminism, and then I listen to The Pain Gap, and I listen to I Hate Men. Like, that sort of thing. Like, I feel like this could be an entry point, but only if you present the right sections at the right time in the right sense. And other than that, I don't think it's like, I don't think it should be held in the highest regard of feminist literature, if that makes sense. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Women Don't Owe You Pretty. I think I went in thinking it was going to be something different. And it went everywhere while going nowhere, I think is what I'm going to say. It tried to cover too much. And even as an intro, like, I've read other, like, more introductory books to feminism, and they've gone a lot of places, but you know, you need to burrow out the things you're saying. You can't just say them and leave them and move on. I feel like that's what this book really did. So, as I said, it could be good entry points for some people at the right time in their feminist journey, and I'm not there. So I think I'm going to give this a 2-star, and those are my thoughts on Women Don't Owe You Pretty. Bye.